We're meeting today with Clark Aposhian, and rather than give a formal introduction, why don't we just launch in by having you tell us what your experience recently was. Today is June 25th, 2014. So let's work back a couple days and start there.
Now, 2 days ago, after 13 months, some charges against me were dismissed. A protective order was dropped in an ongoing case I've had, in which resulted from Memorial Day of 2013, where I backed a large truck to turn around into my ex-wife's driveway and left. Nothing more than that. There was no malicious intent. I just needed to turn this big truck around, and it just happened to be the most convenient and safe way to do it. Anyway, it resulted in 2 protective orders. It resulted in criminal charges against me and domestic violence charges, and in the presence of a child, and you name it, it was heaped on. And Monday, 2 days ago, everything was finally dismissed after a long fight.
That come as a surprise to you, this experience?
Absolutely it did. I mean,
That was a rhetorical question, but tell us a little bit.
You live your
about
life with what you figure is good decorum. You obey the law. You try to maintain good character. In a decent working relationship with in this case, my ex-spouse. After 12 years of marriage and going through 5 years after that of divorce, having never had the police called, having never even had a charge leveled against me in custody court or anything like that, and it literally for my whole life, having never had a criminal charge against me in any way, all of a sudden to be hit with domestic violence in the presence of a child, criminal acts, protective orders, and the protective orders, they restricted me from my livelihood. I mean, I'm a firearms instructor, I'm a gun lobbyist, so on and so forth. The biggest thing was...
so there was some gun violence
There was
involved
no
in your
gun
case.
violence. No, there was no. I mean, I told you what happened. I backed a truck partway into my ex-wife's driveway and left. I didn't go over the lawn. I didn't go over the curb.
You didn't make a phone call. You didn't threaten
make a
anybody.
phone call. Yeah, I didn't. There was
draw a gun,
there were no
didn't
threats.
reference a gun.
There were no threats. There was no yelling.
Just stare at
despite what you
somebody
hear. There was
sternly.
no stare. There was no, there was no shaking my fist. There was nothing. It was. I backed the truck up, and they were able to parlay that into everything from criminal trespass, disorderly conduct, criminal mischief, domestic violence in the presence of a child. By the way, when I backed the truck up into the driveway, my ex-wife and daughter and her new husband weren't even there. They were inside the house
when
somewhere.
you got out of the truck and started
I never got out of the
stomping
truck.
around.
I
Oh, well
never
then,
got out of the truck.
when you ran over the rose bush.
I didn't. It stayed right on the driveway. Never even came close to even the lawn. Now, these are things that were supposed to have, that were alleged that, that I made threats and that I yelled and I went over the lawn and honked the air horn and so on and so forth, and that I was not only did that I was then a continuing threat to them. And so, so the big thing was, the protective order and all those restrictions. That wasn't the big thing. I gotta tell you, I mean, the guns, hey, I'm best known for, gun laws and training and that type of thing, but I wasn't able to see my daughter. Even though I had never been convicted of a thing.
When you you were convicted.
I was never convicted of anything.
Well, but there was sufficient evidence.
No, there was never ever any. In fact, I would have been convicted had there been sufficient evidence that protective orders don't need that.
Well, but Clark, when it really comes down to a matter of your word against another's, I mean, when there's no witnesses.
It wasn't my word. I had 7 witnesses.
So is this
I had a phone record that showed that my ex-spouse's husband called me. I didn't call him.
Well, explain to us why then it would take 13 months to wrap this up. I mean, clearly there must have been something.
I wish I could
they could hang
explain
their
to
hat
it,
on.
but I have seen 5 judges in this. I've had 4 attorneys. I've been to 4 different courthouses over the last 13 months, and I think I barely escaped this thing, even though everything was on my side. I had to tell you, everything was on my side. I had the witnesses. There was no evidence. There was no previous history whatsoever.
So no crime had been committed.
No crime had been
Yet
committed.
you were being assumed to be the bad guy just because people know that you're a gun lobbyist. that you
Well-
might have a gun, so now all of a sudden you're escalated to
Well,
a threat
everyone
of
might
terrorism.
have a gun.
Exactly.
Many people have an ex-spouse. Many
Sure.
people own vehicles and
Sure.
turn around in a driveway.
Sure.
And yeah, I think, yes, I can't help but think that I was perhaps unfairly targeted, but only targeted by the media. There are folks like me that go through the exact same
Absolutely.
thing all the time. You just don't, it doesn't make national news.
I've been there.
Yeah.
Would it be helpful if there were an outlet for what happens in the family courts?
It'd be great because I think it would cause more people to realize just exactly what's going on. The injustices that happen in family courts, and the injustices typically, I'm going to just get on a soapbox here, against the guy, just because he's a guy and not a female.
So do you think a camera in the courtroom would
I think it'd be
maybe
great.
help to keep things a little
What
bit
would be
more
wrong with that?
transparent?
Well, what about
You know what they
people's
say? You know what they say is sunshine. In this case,
Right.
sunshine is the best disinfectant.
Right. That's a great quote.
And I think
I've heard
a
that
camera in the
before.
courtroom. Hey, you might have a judge or a prosecutor mugging for the court for the camera, but you know what? When I can watch and see how this judge interacts with this, petitioner's counsel or this respondent's counsel or something like that, and say, hey, that's unfair, that's unjust, that's inappropriate.
What's that full quote?
What are you going to do about it?
Then you know what I'm going to do?
What are you going to do?
I'm going to get a hold of my state legislator. I'm going to
Yeah.
get a hold of my governor. I'm going to get a hold of the attorney general. I'm going to get a hold of my state senator, whoever it is, and I'm going to get things changed so that we're on a more level playing field. Because right now we
Absolutely.
are not on a playing field. And I'll tell you this: despite everything else, everybody's heard about Clark couldn't have his guns and he couldn't carry a gun and blah. That's nothing. That's if I had that and a dime, I'd have 10 cents. As far as how much that bothered me. What bothered me is for the last 13 months, having never been convicted
Sure.
of anything, having just had to deal with
Exactly.
untrue, unfounded allegations
Right.
that resulted in charges, that were later all dismissed. I haven't been able to see my daughter
Right.
for 13 months. I haven't been able to talk to my daughter. I haven't been able to send my daughter a letter on her birthday, on Christmas, on Easter, on Father's Day, anything, or receive anything from her, nor have I been able to, because of the protective order, without any evidence, even communicate with her via a third party.
I
I
think
can't
it's-
tell my mom, as she still was able to talk to my daughter, to tell her, hey, I love you, sweetie.
Dad says hi.
Yeah.
Dad says I love you.
Couldn't do that.
I think it's well known in the state of Utah that, and maybe in the entire United States or across the world, a protective order in a divorce, it's supposed to be, a protective order was designed to be a shield to protect people that need to be protected from violence, not turned around and used as a sword, as the quote goes.
Oh, it's a precursor. A protective order, especially in Utah, is nothing more than a precursor to I'm getting full custody of the kids.
Right.
Well, but I mean, would you want, if you were the judge, would you want it on your hands that you didn't grant a protective order and then later on that husband or wife or boyfriend or girlfriend ends up putting someone in the hospital or in an early grave?
Well, no, because it wouldn't be on my head. I'm going to operate within the law. As a judge, I'm going to look at the evidence. And I got to tell you, there's a lesser standard of proof, preponderance of the evidence, as opposed to, beyond a reasonable doubt. In these cases, if they don't meet that standard,
Right.
then I'm not going to grant the protective order.
Due
I'm
process.
sorry if the legislature in their infinite wisdom decide that that's not the standard and we need a lower standard, then fine, by all means change it. But you know what? It's not up to the judges to decide what that standard is. The standard is set. It's a preponderance of the evidence. If you don't meet the preponderance of the evidence, regardless of whatever emotion and tears are shed, then you don't have it. If you do meet it, then you know what? Protective order should be issued.
Let me segue from that then. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, to recap, and I know because I've been there, I was before a judge, I had a similar situation in my divorce where the custody wasn't established and I had my boy and he was sick and I'd been communicating, hey, I'm not taking him back until he's over being sick because he's still a little bit sick. I communicated it. I thought I had record and proof of it. And then there was an altercation to which I didn't do anything, but I still was facing charges. The point I'm trying to get to, though, with the protective order that had been put in place with hardly any evidence, hardly any due process, it just basically ripped my family in half. So a second time, I went before a judge. The child was living with me at the time, my child in common, and the judge just assumed. And I have to ask myself, and I'm not one of those people that think, well, there's these stereotypes and these, I'm not a bitter person. I'm not a person that doesn't like women. I'm happily remarried. But I got before the judge, and the judge just automatically assumed that the child was living with mom and put a protective order between me and my own child. And I didn't realize it until I got home, looked at the paperwork, and I went, whoa, what happens when he runs, says, Dad, I need my diaper changed. Am I supposed to run away? Protective order. I can't help my own child. Next day I went in and we cleared it right up because obviously a protective order between me and the child that was living in the same house.
So you're saying, so in other words, the court just assumed
I have to believe
child
that.
lived with mom.
Yes.
And that just that reinforces that whole presumption.
With the history of protective order petitions or, a request for a protective order being granted just almost, obviously automatically, if we're going to keep the system the way it is, let's save some money. You file your protective order on computer and it just comes to you in the mail. I mean, that's essentially what we have. And let's cut out the justices, save all that money. But obviously, we have to have that perception that, oh no, the judge is going to be overlooking this, going to be overseeing and deciding if the protective order is valid or not.
Because obviously, innocence should be a protection.
Exactly.
And if it isn't,
yeah,
then let's just get rid of the pretext.
Exactly. But we obviously, no one would ever say, oh no, because I don't think it would change very much if you just were able to push a few buttons on your computer with the Justice System's website and get the protective order mailed to you without any interference from the other side, which is essentially what we have.
That's right.
The sad thing is by doing that, by not looking at them and having a scrutiny, an eye that would be able to look over and look for evidence and look for preponderance of evidence and look for actual due process and make sure those things were in place, that doesn't happen. So the people that actually do need it, that are being completely abused, beat, nobody in this room wants to say, hey, I'm against protective orders because I want women to get beat up. That's ridiculous. Yeah. No one here would like that.
It cheapens the perception of a protective order, though,
and it makes
when
it
you
harder
just
for
hand
them to
them
get.
out.
Yes.
All right?
Boy that cried
on
wolf.
request.
That's what I'm saying.
Right? Exactly. And it cheapens them when someone lies on a protective order to get them. I mean, it says, hey, false statements on a protective order are a
6
criminal
years
offense.
in federal
6
prison.
years.
Like that's ever been upheld.
Tell me the last time that how many people that you know of, I mean, are we talking 100, 500, 1,000 people that have ever been sent to federal prison because of that?
I don't know if
I don't think it's ever
it's not a federal prison, but
or a prison.
Yeah, but I know of none. Now that doesn't mean it didn't happen, but
Not even one?
Not even one. I've been practicing 17 years and I don't know of even one.
You don't even heard of one?
Never even heard of it.
You see, so I ask you then, what is the difference if we were to just keep the system the way it is and just institute this direct, internet-based thing?
The difference
wouldn't change
would be
any
this.
difference.
The difference would be this.
Wouldn't be any difference.
We would save a lot of money and we'd cut through a lot of crap, but we wouldn't have a justice system.
No, of course we wouldn't. So that's the problem. So you know what? If we're going to change it, we got to start changing that premise right then and there. And you can keep the preponderance of the evidence, but you know what? The judges or the commissioners need to be on notice that keep your emotions out of this. We hired you to be a judge.
Yeah, if you're not up to making those tough decisions, no one's forcing you to hold this job. Let me segue from that then to talking about this experience with the criminal side of things. It arises out of about 5 years after a divorce. How did this impact your experience with your divorce and the child custody?
What do you mean? How did it impact?
Well, you talked about, for example, you haven't had any contact with your daughter. Tell me a little bit about what you think your impressions of how you thought divorce would work and what had actually happened were.
Oh my gosh,
because
boy,
once
did I get
again,
an education.
A lot of people hear about, you go to school and you have, what's it called? The studies
Ethics.
or that's just the civics that you have in high school or junior high. You kind of get a basic understanding of the three branches of government, and you hear about due process and
checks and balances,
and constitutional
equality.
rights. So you think you know what to expect. How did what you expect differ from your actual experiences in the child custody?
It's like jumping into an extremely cold lake at the deep end. Okay.
What did you expect, and what didn't or did not occur?
I expected. Now, I knew a little bit that there was very likely slanted towards, it would be slanted towards my spouse in this case, a little bit. Little did I realize how extremely slanted it was, that when I went into court, I was not equal.
Well, but
I
Clark,
had to fight an uphill battle.
Let me interrupt you. But Clark, that's just a bitter man who lost custody talking.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have custody of your children, and that's why you're so angry.
Talk to any
Right.
man who's had to go through a custody, any man who's had to go through a custody case in Utah. Okay? Yeah, at first I thought I was the only one.
Yeah.
And then my ears started perking up to everybody else, and there was a common denominator.
But you're avoiding my question,
Because
Clark.
I was a man, not a woman.
But you don't have joint custody, and that's why you're so angry.
No, we did have joint custody. We had 50% legal custody, 50% physical custody.
And you're
I
still
had it.
saying you're
I had it.
okay.
It took me 2 years for the first custody evaluation to get that, and then another 2 years after that, and I was, they sent me through a whole nother custody evaluation to get that.
So after
Well-
joining some groups and kind of seeing, hey,
Exactly.
I'm not some weird break off of what's really going
This
on.
is the standard in Utah. Now, folks that come from California or Idaho or Montana,
Right.
they see this as, oh my gosh, Utah does this.
It's
This
a
is
problem.
an anomaly.
It's
You
a
guys don't
problem.
realize what an anomaly you are here in Utah to have such a slanted thing. We're not talking about fairness and equality for the man or for the woman. You know what? That's beside the point. You guys decided to get divorced. I decided, to continue with the divorce with my wife. She wanted it. The kids had nothing to do with this. My daughter wasn't divorcing me. My daughter wasn't divorcing my ex-wife. She wasn't divorcing us.
Well, wait a minute. And were you alleged, or did you allege?
No, there was no violence
child
alleged.
abuse or anything like
Nothing.
So what you're saying, when you say the kids had nothing to do with it, they really didn't. It was
No,
right.
two spouses getting divorced.
Exactly.
You happen to have kids, and why?
Yeah. And so
Okay.
you got to stop looking at, oh well, it's not fair for the dad, or it's not fair for the mom, or something like that. You look at what's right for the kid, and you are not going to be able to convince me that given a regular situation without threats of abuse or something like that, a standard divorce.
Well, let me ask before you so threats of abuse. What about like in the course of the divorce, dad moves to Singapore? I mean, you're
Yeah.
not suggesting that joint custody can still work then.
You know what? If that was a common pattern of dads moving to Singapore or far away, then yeah, we'd start addressing it like that. But no, if dad moves to Singapore, you go back to court and you say, hey, you know what? Dad moved to Singapore. This
Something-
50-50 custody ain't working.
Something I wanted to interject with real quick, not to cut anybody off. One of the things that I think many of our viewers that are going to be watching this, because he has the Family Law TV and I have the Justice TV, basically anybody that's gone through a divorce, you really cannot relate. All due respect to anybody that hasn't gone through, and I wouldn't wish a divorce on anybody, but when you go through a situation where you haven't seen your child and they're going through they're 2 years old, the first time they're going to say daddy or ride a bike, those are things you're never going to get back. And so no amount of money, no amount of the house or the car is going to make that better or fix that. And so I sympathize with you, and I understand what you're going through when you can't see your child, because I've had to literally peel my own child, who I know was in more emotional torment at that point than I've ever seen. No scrape on a knee, nothing else. It hurts worse than when you're literally peeling your child off because you have to give them back. And that's hard enough in a situation where there's a 50-50. But when you haven't seen them and you're completely cut off, you have no communication because some protective order was just slapped through and stamped, it's unbelievable.
And like, you're right.
It's horrible.
But you know what? It's hard for us. It's hard in a divorce. It's hard, to
And the
to
kids.
get off. What's it doing to the kid, though?
Exactly.
That's the thing, is that we're not, is that unfortunately with the system the way we have it, it's not looking out for the best interest of the child, okay? Mom and dad, you take what you get in a divorce. The child, unfortunately, now has to take what they get, but the perception is, oh no, we're doing this for the benefit of the child. This arrangement is for them. You cannot tell me that every other weekend and one day a week, with one parent and the other parent getting, everything else, is appropriate, is good for the kid. You know what's best for the kid? A two-parent household with a loving family, that's what's best. Well, in a divorce, you don't have that. So you know what? the time should be defaulted split between mom
Come
and
as
dad.
close as you can.
And if something is thrown into the mix, like dad moving to Singapore, or mom is a
Drives truck or
a meth user or something
Right.
like this,
Something-
you mix that in. But the default should be, aside from all those rare, unusual things that aren't the pattern of normal divorces, then you got to default to mom and dad sharing custody with that child, or the child getting access to mom and dad equally, because that's the best.
Yeah.
Studies have proven that.
And it creates, what we have right now, the system that we have right now, creates more contention than it ever
Exactly.
stops.
Exactly.
Well, I mean, that sounds like a glib remark. What do you mean by that?
I mean that you're in court a heck of a lot more on custody issues than you are on division of property issues. A divorce can really be handled online, if you will, but then you mix in the custody. I'll tell you what, it's I'll make this statement, and and I'll stand by it, that if we had a default of 50-50 custody, we'd have fewer divorces in Utah.
Less
because
violence.
if I knew that if I divorced my spouse that I wasn't going to have 95% custody,
Right.
then you know what? I may decide to stick it out, to get some counseling, to stay married, to do something like that, because the incentive of having the child and the associated paycheck that comes with it
Right.
is not going to be there. I may stick it out.
I'd add to this, my thought was, as you were speaking, was irrespective of what effect it has on the divorce rate, it would certainly reduce the amount of contention around the child custody award. Because everybody would know, as a matter of statute, hey, unless you can prove dad's moving to Singapore or mom's on meth or some circumstance that clearly won't work with joint custody, it's going to be joint custody with the kids.
I think
Mom
of
and dad.
it as this: a divorce. If you think of a divorce kind of like a fire, it's not something you planned for. It's not something you wanted, but it's going to devastate your life if you don't get out of there and deal with it appropriately. I think it's similar to a fire in the sense that, when you're leaving the house, you're going to take the things that matter to you most. You're not going to grab your iPad. You're not going to grab, the book you were reading. You're going to make sure the dog's okay, the kids are okay, that mom's out of the house. You're going to care about the things that mean the most. So in a divorce, that's what people always get hung up on, is the custody, because you care the most about your kids. I could have cared less about the house. I could have cared less about my pension or 401k or whatever, or alimony. That is all small potatoes to the real issue, and it should be that way, that kids are the most important thing, because family is so important in
Exactly.
Utah.
And again, I go back to what is best for the
So
kids.
we're out of line.
If someone could convince me that it was best for my daughter to stay with my ex all the time, and they could convince me of that, then you know what? If that's what's best, then I'm going to suck it up and I'm going to do it.
And convince your daughter.
Right.
And
That's
convince my daughter.
That's the thing.
You know?
Ask the kids, talk to kids.
But you aren't going to convince me of that, and no one has been able to successfully do that. Yet we do that.
Yeah,
We do that day in and day out
In
in child custody cases. We just make that perception that,
Sadly.
oh no, that child is better with mom than with dad.
Yeah, talk to people whose parents divorced as they were children, and they will say, I missed my dad. I missed my mom because that was the non-custodial parent. There was no reason it had to be that way other than it was court ordered and could be court enforced.
Hey, it works in California. It works in Idaho. It works in Montana. It works in many other states. I don't know, Kansas and Delaware. And this is not. We're not inventing something new here.
Right.
We've had a laboratory of sorts that works. As far as that aspect of it goes, works just fine.
Right.
And you can't tell me California is an anomalous state with a tiny population. That it seems, they have a lot of divorces in
I
California.
think Utahns deserve it.
Yeah.
And it's way past due. We really need 50-50 to be presumed, the presumption of 50-50
Exactly.
rights.
We appreciate you taking the time to speak with us, and we appreciate your observations and opinions too.